I'm going to do a video here on releasing a stuck rotor. Now, I actually already uploaded a video on releasing the rotor retaining screws here and here with an impact driver. So that basically, if you got a couple of holes there with the retaining screws, having any problems getting them out, just reference that video of using the impact driver. Anyway, as you can see, this rotor will spin, but it'll get to a point where it sticks. So actually, I'm trying to move that back right now. Be careful if you do this. What I'm aiming to do here is to get this hole down here at the bottom of the rotor, because within this, behind this rotor here, is going to be pads for the emergency brake. And I think what's going on is that those pads are stuck against the rotor. You can see I could spin it, but then to go to a point right now where it stops. So I'm going to very carefully, because I don't want to damage these threads, I'm going to put a little pressure on it and see if I can move that back. You can see how it's sticking. So if you have to put a whole lot of pressure on this, maybe stop and reassess, because like I say, I don't want to damage the threads of the lug nuts there. But once I get this to the bottom, that's what we're looking for here. Got to take a flathead screwdriver, pop this rubber grommet out of there, because what that is to allow us access to the adjustment of the pads of the emergency brake. And I think what's going on here is that those pads are sticking on the inside of the rotor. The inside of this rotor is machined. The pads kind of come out like that when the emergency brake is actuated. Well, maybe I'll stop the video for a second, because I don't know what's coming out. I just wanted to show you here, if you're doing this, not to put too much pressure on this rubber grommet. You don't want to rip it or anything. Just try to ease it out. And with a little luck, I might be able to get enough light in there to show you what we're trying to adjust. I was going to try to show the adjustment here to loosen off the emergency brake. You basically put a flathead screwdriver and you feel around in there, and there's a little notched mechanism there where you can release them. But anyway, another method here, depending on what kind of a rotor you have on your vehicle, you can put a couple of bolts. If hopefully your rotor is equipped with the holes in them, and what this will do is you can thread 2 bolts. In the case of what my handy dandy $30 manual for the vehicle told me, is that they're 8 by 1.25 millimeters, I believe it was, and I just went down to my auto parts store, asked for 2 of those bolts, and I'm threading them in. And what's happening here is, as I thread that in, it starts to push the rotor off. So that's actually a great design. But I've seen rotors that don't have those holes. But if they're there, that's great. Just go from one to the other, tightening it up a bit at a time, and you'll see that that's actually pushing the rotor right off the hub there. I think what I'll do is I'll remove the rotor, and because I can't get a visual for you on the adjustment down through here, once I get the rotor off, we'll show you what's there that way. Also, thread a couple of lug nuts, your wheel nuts, onto the bolts here, just in case, because there's a lot of pressure on this as it's starting to release. And this way, if this rotor suddenly is really seized on there and releases all of a sudden, these bolts that are threaded on there 5 or 6 turns will keep that from popping out. Safety measure. Okay, so as I threaded these 2 bolts in, it did push the rotor away from the hub. Now you can see there's no pressure on that. So now I'll take these wheel nuts off, because I can see that, as I say, there's obviously no pressure on this now, so it's not dangerous to remove it. So I'll take these 2 bolts out and take the rotor off. So even with the bolts, now that it's really released all the tension off of that rotor, even though we drove those bolts in and released all the pressure, still, as you say, as you can see here, kind of tight. Now I don't want to really force it out too much more, because I don't want to damage the pads for the emergency brake. So this is what I was talking about here as far as releasing the pressure on that emergency brake. Put the flathead screwdriver in. There's an adjustment in there. Hopefully you'll feel that go against there's notches inside here. The screwdriver will set against one, and you can kind of feel as you go. Hopefully you can hear that. Turning that adjustment, you'll feel the screwdriver hit against the notch, and count the number of times that you turn that. Good idea too to squirt some brake cleaner in around there. That'll keep that hazardous brake dust down and kind of lubricate up the parts. When I was trying to release the tension on the emergency brake using the flathead screwdriver, and what I was trying to get across, I've actually taken a piece here and try to get my point across here. It's a little difficult to show when you're doing it, but basically these 2 groove points you see over here and on this side lock in on either side of the brake pads. So the screwdriver hits on these notches, and as we turn it, forcing this either one way or the other, it changes the length of the whole unit. So maybe you'll see what I'm getting at there. And that's how when the unit gets shorter, we're releasing the pressure on the pads against the inside of the rotor. And when we adjust it, we want to increase the pressure on the pads. We place the screwdriver against here, and as you can see, the length of the threaded piece here is getting longer and longer. That's going to push out on the brake pads, and that increases the amount of pressure on the pads inside the rotor, tightening up the emergency brake. So as I said, ironically enough, I have to show this with the rotor off, and the reason that we were going to use this adjustment was to release the tension on the inside of the rotor, but I couldn't show it. So there we have the rotor off, and what we were doing, the screwdriver would come through the front. You bypass those springs there. That's just springs to keep tension on the emergency brake pads. And hopefully you can see where the screwdriver hit that little notch that we were just showing. And you'll kind of move up the spring. You'll feel it hit a notch, and you turn it. And depending on which way you go, I'm just going to do it with my fingers there to show you. That's why it's a little difficult. See, you're going to go through there with your screwdriver through this hole and adjust the length, and it's kind of difficult to get because you're getting around this spring here. Hopefully you get the idea. Okay, got the new rotor on. That's spinning freely. I got my screws tightened in there, keep the rotor in place. So now what I'm going to do is put our adjustment hole there at the bottom so we can access that adjuster. Now reference your little handy dandy manual you got for your vehicle. Hopefully you have one. If you don't, put that in the flathead screwdriver and change the adjustment that we discussed until those pads just start to touch. I'll have to do a couple more of those. I'll get that adjusted and I'll show you what we're talking about. Okay, so I adjusted it so that the emergency brake pads are just touching. So now I'm going to position my adjuster hole down here again to the bottom so I can access that adjustment, and I'm going to move it. As I say, you're going to have to get a feel for this, but you can feel the screwdriver hit those teeth we were talking about. You might have to move the spring out of the way a little bit, and then I'm going to adjust it so that the pads just release. That's looser. I'll make a couple more turns and tape again. So I adjusted that so that the emergency brake pads just release. Now I'm going to operate the emergency brake and verify it's working. And there it is, it's operated. And I just put it on the second notch. There's about 4 or 5 notches on that emergency brake when I pull it up, so that should be good. I'll take it for a test drive on a hill with a little bit of a grade and just operate, put it in neutral, operate the emergency brake a couple of times just lightly and make sure everything is working okay.